Welcome to the YouTube channel for Sharova Law. Today we're going to talk about divorce and marriage in New York City in the modern times. We have with us Meredith Shirey, a couples expert, and Bruce Pravda, who is the senior trial attorney for the law office of Elena Sharova. My name is Frank Davis. I'm a litigation consultant with the office of Elena Sharova, and I'd like to start with a provocative statement today to the both of you. Imagine Donald Trump, our president, has issued an executive order banning or forbidding divorce in the United States. Who would support that if that happened? Meredith?
Well, not me. I can't speak from the legal perspective, obviously, but from a mental health perspective, I could only imagine the anxiety and the fear and sadness that crippled people right after the election and into the inauguration would, return probably tenfold. From a mental health perspective, people tend to not like having their autonomy taken away and, kind of being told what they can do, whether it's in the legal sense or otherwise, and they tend to not respond well to that. And so, we saw an influx of anxiety. I know my practice saw a flood of new referrals right after the election.
Really?
Yeah, mostly due to, just anxiety, sadness, and fear about what the future holds. And so I could only imagine that would, again, kind of resurface if in fact that ever did happen.
I have a question. Did any of that have to do with couples differing on the election of the president?
We did actually see that quite a bit. Even if not necessarily they differed in terms of who they voted for, but just some of the issues that came about in terms of, really kind of having inherent differences in values on, how do you say things like, division of finances or social issues such as marriage equality and those kinds of things. So, it was interesting to have those conversations with couples. Some of them, even if they both, were opposed to Trump, if one had more of an adverse reaction, the other one wasn't necessarily validating of that caused issues too. So it seems like across the board we saw, kind of the whole gamut of it.
Okay. Bruce, what do you think? Why do we have the options of divorce?
Well, having the options of divorce basically is bordering on a right of the parties given to them by each state that they reside in. And it's an outcome of necessity on many occasions. And therefore, to lose that right would create a great deal of animosity between the parties. It would create a great deal of, physicalities to occur, because the parties do not want to stay together. And therefore, this right is I'm not going to say a God-given right, but it is a right for each state to allow their individuals to most definitively, if they want to separate, they want to get divorced, and it's a right that should not be taken away.
I understand. The concept of marriage itself is usually based around love. As the Beatles famously say, all you need is love. Please share your thoughts regarding love as the main power behind the marriage. Meredith?
Well, this is really kind of an interesting and, somewhat loaded question because, defining what love is, right? So, when people start in a relationship, the dopamine receptors in their brain are kind of going crazy and it gives you that feeling of infatuation and people love that feeling, right? We kind of love the idea of being in love. And what happens is over time, things happen. First of all, your brain naturally depletes in the dopamine about 2 years in, typically. But
2 years into the marriage?
2 years into the relationship. So that's just kind of some biology behind it. But then in terms of the marriage and what happens kind of with marriages is that you do need love, but love is something that you have to create and commit to creating and recreating every single day. What happens a lot of times is that over time you have, life, kids, family, job changes, finance changes, any kind of little stressor that impacts people's ability to really put their marriage first and to really work on creating that love. So what happens is over time, you have misconnections, you have miscues. You have those opportunities where you could rebuild and people choose not to. And so over time, those things just build and build and build, those kind of misconnections. And so then you have people who say, well, why am I with this person? I must have married the wrong person. And so you do need love, but you have to work and make a very conscious effort to recreate that every single day. And that's what people kind of miss a lot of times, is it's not necessarily that I fell out of love with someone, it's that I allowed the emotional connection with my partner to deteriorate to the point of, losing trust, perhaps there's a betrayal, and now I say, okay, I'm not in love with this person and I must need out.
Bruce, how does the concept of love play in a divorce action?
Doesn't. Because obviously the question would be, if the parties loved each other, they would seek remedies to redress any issues and not to go to divorce. The issue becomes that love is overrated. People don't think, they think, oh, they're falling in love and that means they should get married. That is not accurate. Okay, you can love pizza. You can love McDonald's, but how many people actually adore pizza and adore McDonald's, all right? So love is a batted term, all right? It's thrown around too much and it has lost its meaning over the years. Adoration is something else. Adoration is a higher form of connection with someone. So therefore, to say love and marriage is not proper in the 21st century. Okay. Perhaps in another century, it might have been more apropos, but in the 21st century, I don't think that love is the key to a successful marriage. Let's face it, we're all human, okay? And 24/7 of love would wear out. It cannot sustain itself without other items, without other, I was going to say interference, without other issues that develop or other expansions of the parties with each other.
It seems, and maybe it's just me, but it seems that most people believe that marriage at one time was a stronger institution. So my question is to the both of you, I'll start with you, Meredith, is how is marriage today different than marriage 50 years ago, do you think?
It's fascinating to think about this because I think you have to take into account so many factors, sociologically, politically, evolutionarily, and quite frankly, the fact is that we don't need it today. Men and women do not have a need for each other anymore. Modern science and medicine, you don't even need each other to procreate, right? And so this idea of what marriage is, we kind of have to expand it, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean what it did 50 years ago when women were very economically dependent on men, and so you didn't see divorce as much because it might not have been possible for someone to leave a marriage even if they wanted to, right? And so now we have a broader view of marriage equality, and and again the fact that procreation can happen with a partner or without a partner if you have the means to. And so it's interesting to see that I'm seeing less people who actually go through the commitment of getting married. I see a lot more partners who are cohabitating, dating, but don't necessarily see signing a legal document as necessary to their lifestyle or to their relationship.
Bruce, is the process of divorce, has that changed over the last 50 years? Has marriage has changed?
Absolutely. I am a mid-20th century individual. I was born in 1947. Although I'm only 25, but I was born in 1947. The point is, just looking on the laws were draconian for a person to get a divorce from the beginning of even prior to the beginning of the 20th century. Just look at the novel of The Scarlet Letter. You couldn't get divorced. The issue continued to be draconian through, I would say, until the 70s, okay? Mid-70s, and later it started to ease up. To get a divorce in those years, in the 20th century, I'm talking about the mid-20th century, I'm not going to go historically back, there were only very narrow grounds: adultery or cruel and inhuman treatment. And also the courts determined if the man was successful in the divorce. Then at that point in time, the woman lost everything. She would lose any sense of, I'm going to use the old term, but most people understand, alimony. She could easily lose custody of the children, because since it was limited to actually 2 issues of adultery, and adultery was of the highest form of immoral character, so therefore if the woman was charged with adultery and found to be adulterous, then why should she have the children? It would impinge on their moral character, so it would be given to the husband. Assets, the same thing would be whoever the husband won, she would be destitute. So it was very difficult. Divorce became, I'm going to use the term, easier as time progressed, simply because society called for it. That's all there is to it. It needed to be redrawn to make it easier to get divorced. And then I remember there was a whole religious argument over that because let's face it, for historically you were married for life.
That's correct. Yes.
Sure.
That was part. Okay, that was the criteria. So the religious parties, the conservatives, were against easing up on divorce, but things change. We're not in the 18th or 19th or even 20th century. You have to match what the culture, what the ethos is of the people. And it became that divorce became easier. I remember it used to be like 1 in 4. I'm doing this 44 years. 1 in 4 would get divorced. Then it rose to 2 in 4. Now it's 3 in 4. Okay, and it's edging even up more. So what you're saying is that it is a common aspect to it. And people are questioning, is it too easy to get a divorce? The answer is, listen, I'm a romantic. I always thought that unless there is a violence issue, unless there is an issue that makes it not possible for the parties to live together, they should try to work it out, and stay together. But as time has developed, I've lost that philosophy because it just doesn't work out. If people are unhappy, you gotta, something should be done to try to create happiness. Happiness is a philosophy that is overwrought. Okay, you should always try to not find happiness, but try to develop happiness in you. Okay, not to find it, you'll never find it, but you try to develop happiness into you. But if a part of a person has lost their emotional ties with someone, or both parties have lost their emotional ties, then it's something to do about it. But it's still very emotional and very overwhelming to get a divorce, because it reflects on a person's feelings of failure. That it's their fault, it didn't work out, or it's the other person's fault. So now that develops into rage or hate of the other party, because they're the ones that didn't make the marriage go.
Last provocative question. Is it worth in the 21st century to get married? Meredith?
That's a fascinating question. I think that it very much depends on your lifestyle and what your goals are, what your values are. But I think more than anything, it's important for you, if you have a partner and you're contemplating this, to find out where they are and to make sure that your values match up in that regard, and that you have the same expectation of, okay, if we decide to be in this committed relationship, is marriage a goal? If it's not a goal, is there some kind of middle ground? If you have someone who's set on, getting married and having children and kind of progressing in that way, and you have someone who's not, clearly that's something that, if one feels coerced in one way or the other, resentment will ultimately breed from that, and it's not going to end well. So this is actually something we talk to people a lot, especially if they are contemplating marriage, is talking about these inherent values and making sure that these are things that either match up, or if that there's a mismatch, that you can accept that. Because again, when we try to coerce and change people tend to be pretty resistant to that. We really like our autonomy quite a bit. And, and I think a big part of that as well, funnily, I just had a conversation with a psychologist about this yesterday, about how, there's no one way to live. And what ends up being problematic a lot of times is if you have someone who thinks that they want marriage, if they think that this is something that they want either because society, their family, someone kind of prescribes this value to them, but they don't necessarily believe it in themselves. So, when you have someone who maybe habitually cheats on their spouse or does these kinds of things outside of the marriage, but then still wants to have this marriage, things like that, it's much more important for you to be very, very honest with yourself and about what your values really are and what it is that you want for your life and the kind of culture you want to create and the legacy you want to leave. Because if you don't want to get married, if you want to be someone who has that freedom, that's fine. But it's very important to be cognizant of another person and to not kind of drag them into this as well. And to kind of be mindful of, if you want to go down a certain road, what's the impact going to be on another person? So, if we see people who are kind of habitual cheaters, but kind of want this facade of, having the spouse because they think it looks good. From a psychological standpoint, there are a few things wrong with that. One being this kind of sociopathic tendency of I'm above the rules. I don't have to play by the rules of monogamy. And also the narcissistic piece of I am doing this for the appearance of, how this looks to other people. So if you want to talk about famous cases of this, Tiger Woods, Elliot Spitzer, when these kind of people who maybe have, a tendency to want to go outside of the marriage, it's really important for them to, again, kind of get in touch with themselves and their own values and to be okay with being honest about that. So in terms of, is marriage something that we necessarily need? I think it depends on each individual person and what your values are. But the most important thing is just to be honest with yourself and to be honest with a potential partner.
What do you say, Bruce?
Well, I agree with what she says. Again, traditionalism was for the family unit. So when children looked at a family unit, many of them say, well, my mother and father were married 45, 50 years, So they emulate, try to imitate that happiness that they remember with their parents. But as time went by, their parents divorced, okay? And now children are now saying, wait a second, my parents weren't happy. It was a bad divorce. Even there's no such thing as a good divorce. Okay, it's always emotional and it always takes its toll on people. I don't care if it's children who are below the age of 21 or children who are 30 or 40 years old. It's quite common now that marriages of over 25, 30 years, people are getting divorced. So that tells you something, that nothing is secured, okay, nothing's set in cement. So the issue now becomes these people think about their parents, their brothers, sisters, other relatives that they got married and then they got divorced and it was not a pleasant situation. So I think more people today feel that they shouldn't get married, okay, unless there's some form of urgency to it. And that is probably going to continue along for many generations at this point, because it's going away from the, as I said, traditional concepts. But again, it's up to the two parties, and as such, they should really think deeply about it. Again, there's no longer a moral pressure for people to live together. In the 70s, late 60s, actually, that started to happen. People were just living together, right? And it was a huge topic of conversation amongst everyone. It was immoral. That's what basically it was. Well, again, based upon religious beliefs and religious philosophies. And as time went by, it became more common. And a lot of people, even people who were married, they would say, gee, you know what, it's not so bad to live together, to get to know each other, that kind of situation. But as time comes by, when the divorce rate is beyond control at this point, it just keeps getting more and more, then people today look at it and go, well, the marriage apparently is not the right choice to make. So they would live together. However, living together does have its consequences. Especially when children are involved. Assets, all these things. You may not be married, but you do have issues that have to be determined. If you don't have any kind of contract or a written understanding, not an oral understanding. Oral understanding is not worth the paper it's written on. So therefore, if it's something that has to be actually in writing to try and eliminate further consequences and actions when there is a split up. Because married or just living together, it is the same emotional tensions, the same problems, and the same issues as if the parties were indeed married at the time.
All right, thank the both of you
Thank
for
you.
your news and
Thank
views
you.
today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe and don't forget to share.